Hello, everyone. My name's Kurt Morris. I'm a social worker who lives in Massachusetts. I also am a contributor, interviewer, reviewer to Razorcake, the oldest punk zine continually operating in the United States. We focus on DIY culture and punk, and we produce a magazine called Razorcake, amongst many other things that we do. I also do podcasts for them. And today I want to share with you about a song off the new album. And the song is At Peace, and the album's At Peace, and talk to you about the effect it's had on me, even though the album hasn't been out that long. It's already had a big impact on me. So just so you know where I'm coming from, Propagandhi is one of my top 3 favorite bands. In case you're curious, Leatherface is another. I don't know who the third is, maybe Slayer. The Winnipeg 4-piece has been around for close to 40 years now, and I not only love their music, but their lyrics continue to educate and push me to reevaluate my life. I was vegetarian and thought about becoming vegan for many years, but the analysis of their lyrics on this very podcast convinced me to take that plunge. I was exposed to Noam Chomsky and atrocities in foreign countries through Propagandhi's songs. Even as someone with a bachelor's in history and a master's degree in American studies, I'm still learning things from the band. Their most recent album, At Peace, has a song, Benito's earlier work, that taught me about the socialist beginnings of Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini. Never knew about that before. But it's another song on At Peace I want to talk about, the title track. Musically, it's the most aggressive tune of the 48 minutes of music. Right from the start, there's a great riff that the band comes back to throughout the song, although they speed it up once it kind of kicks in. The drumming is fast-paced, and while George's cymbal sound isn't as big as past albums thanks to his tinnitus, his pounding still packs a punch. Todd's bass playing is as muscular as ever and works well with the guitar. The band's music on the song can be aggressive, soft, loud, and quiet-er. And like most Propagandhi albums, the vocals and music work well with one another. Not only do the lyrics hit hard, but the vocals pair up with the guitar and drum beats to accent the power of the words. It's almost like the lyrics came first and the guitar parts were built around them. I doubt that's the case, but the two combine so well, I can't help but wonder. Musically, it's hard to say if this is the best song on the album, but it's definitely one of my favorites. However, it's the lyrics I wanted to focus on because I could identify so well with them. Propagandhi lyrics tend to do one of two things. They educate or emote. Chris and Todd may be informing the listener of a historical, political, or social issue and offering it as insight into how it relates to some aspect of the human condition. Or they're writing about what it's like to get older, look at their relationships with family, or realize that the attempts to, quote, rage against the machine may not amount to much. At Peace, the song, does the latter, and while I appreciate the songs that teach me things as I get older, I identify more with the lyrics and the personal reflections by Todd and Chris.
Hedge every bear, lick every boot, make every appeal. Prostrate yourself to the killing machine, spare yourself from its wheels. Better them than me, roll so seductively off your tongue. Your reckoning has begun.
At Peace, the song was written by Chris, and the first verse starts with him noting how some people put forward the idea that those in power won't ever come after them. The other gets caught up as long as the in-group prostrates itself to the powers that be. Do whatever you can to survive, letting go of your ethics or moral qualms, this group in power seems to believe. But, Chris reminds us, they will eventually face a reckoning, as those who were once in can quickly become the other. you don't really need to look any further than most of the people who formerly worked with Donald Trump to see an example of this. One of the reasons I got into social work, which is my current field of work, was I appreciated how it matched with my belief of helping the other within the realm of mental health. As a student of history, I'm also aware of how quickly powers rise and fall. I'd much rather be on the side of justice and equality, knowing that, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It's tempting to side with those in power because it makes our lives easier. But when bad things are happening to others, I see it as my responsibility to speak up. That said, speaking up and activism, they look different for everyone. And what works for me may not work for you. But as long as we do our part to help others, we can hold our heads high.
In spite of endless war, extinction level events, depredation and plague, every one of your ancestors survived the reproductive age. The probability that you are even here is next to none. Hey, no pressure, everyone.
In the past year, I started getting into genealogy. One might figure that, my interest in history, I would have delved into my family tree years ago. But I always thought it was meaningless, and frankly, I figured my family was probably pretty boring. But lately, I've been realizing how much I look like the men on my mom's side of the family, both in our faces and our bodies. So I was curious about my mom's paternal side of the clan and did some digging. And in doing so, I've learned that the first person on my mom's side to come to North America was a man named James, back in the early 1700s. He arrived from Scotland, settled in Connecticut, and married a woman from Massachusetts. James had a son, Thomas, who fought in the Revolutionary War at some of the first battles, like Concord and Bunker Hill. And he went on to fight for the colonies for 5 years. And because of this, I started digging into my dad's side, too. His ancestors came from England and were some of the first 500 people who founded the city of New Haven, Connecticut, which is home to Yale University. In fact, there's actually a neighborhood there, Morris Cove, named after my 6-time great-grandfather's brother. Now, given my love of old cemeteries, it's probably not a surprise I've tried to track down some of the folks, but to little avail. I actually did find James' father-in-law's grave in Bolton, Massachusetts, so James was the first person on my mom's side to come here, and this was his father-in-law. It was weird to stand there in front of his headstone and think, wow, if this guy had gotten smallpox as a kid and died, I wouldn't be here. Or if Thomas, the Revolutionary War veteran, was killed at the Battle of Bunker Hill, I wouldn't be reading this to you. If the Morris side of the family died on their sea voyage to New Haven, there'd be no Kurt. And I'm sure I have ancestors who survived the Black Plague. If they hadn't, no one would know who I am. This is what Chris is referring to. One of the things I've loved about researching my genealogy is that it's given me a really great appreciation for my existence. And while Chris utilizes sarcasm to point out the pressure this may cause for some folks, I stand back from it all and I'm amazed that I'm here. I'm reminded of the Neutral Milk Hotel line, how strange it is to be anything at all.
When shit got dark, I had to face it alone. There'd be no crying for help. Just how wild I've had to figure shit out my whole life by myself. I say it's cool, it's fucked up. Truth be told, it's cost me a few friends. Sometimes you must protect yourself. Fuck around, reserves for resilient. I power through the waves of disappointment. Maybe not quite thriving, but I'm buoyant. I am at peace these days. Give and take a fit of blinding rage.
While I may have received financial support, housing, clothes, and food from my parents over the years, emotionally speaking, I've been on my own since I was around 13. So in that regard, when shit got dark, I had to face it alone. I certainly did my share of crying, but not for help. Yes, I looked to friends and therapists for advice and direction, but at the end of the day, I'm wired to have to figure shit out by myself. Sometimes when you're in an icebreaker situation and people ask those types of questions of like, who's your hero? Or who was an adult or teacher or professor who made a big impact on your life? I never know what to say. I never had someone who changed my life or took me under their wing. I had to figure out my life on my own. The only hero I have is the younger version of myself because he put in a lot of work. He educated himself about mental health. He went to therapy. He got on medication. He tried to figure out relationships. I would have loved to have gotten help from others, but I didn't always know how to ask for it. And also, like Chris says, I kind of wanted to protect myself. I thought I had to do certain things to keep myself from being hurt. And some people look at this and say and think, "Wow, you're really self-sufficient," or some variation of "That's cool." And like Chris, I would respond, "No, it's fucked up. I definitely lost friends and hurt people because I didn't know that I have an avoidant personality type. I don't have the time to tell you about the people, especially women, who've told me they loved me, cared about me, and I pulled away. I fucked up. I didn't have good communication skills because no one taught me how to express my feelings in a constructive, healthy manner. But there were also times I legitimately felt I had to withdraw or respond in a certain way because I had to protect myself emotionally. Although I don't think I would have put it that way at the time. I was simply doing what I had to do mentally to survive. That said, I'm fucking resilient. There's very little that truly and deeply frustrates me. I rarely, if ever, fly off the handle. I don't yell at people or get angry very often. A lot of that has been meditation. That's helped. Being a librarian for a big part of my life and learning how to research for grad school, getting in touch with my emotions has made me a resourceful person. If there's disappointment, it doesn't really last long. I know the skills I need to power through it. Unlike Chris, though, I'd say I'm thriving, although there are certain areas where I know I could improve. But compared to how I was 5 or 6 years ago, I'm very much at peace these days. I'm still passionate, though, about certain political issues, and occasionally they make me very angry, a reference to his line of give or take a fit of blinding rage. A few years ago, I remember watching the first season of Handmaid's Tale, and seeing how the women were treated on the show made me so angry. I could feel my body tighten and my blood pump faster when I watched some of those episodes. I remember going into work the next day and telling my manager, she had suggested I watch the show, and I remember telling her I've never felt so angry at a TV show, or at least how people were treated on it. So injustice still riles me, even the fictional kind. But the last line of this section reminds me of the t-shirt Propagandhi sells, which shows a face. Half of it is the police sketch of the Unabomber, and the other half is the Buddha. That's how I feel a lot of times, although I'd say maybe it's 85% Buddha and 15% Unabomber. And to be clear, I have no intention of harming anyone, but I can understand the Unabomber's rage toward modern society. The high school and college punk I used to be was very angry and frustrated with societal constructs and people, and punk was a great outlet for that, but it never provided many helpful answers to what to do with the rage. It was in finding mindfulness, meditation, and Buddhism that I finally found some peace. That is not a sales pitch for any of that, but it's what caused some people who only knew me since I got into meditation to be in disbelief when I told them that I was at one point a very bitter person.
I can't seem to shake the belief that there's a liminal state between death and rebirth in which you and me reconvene. Oh yeah. Trust me, sir, this is an Arby's. I am at peace.
Harkening back to the first verse, Chris is returning to folks who want to kneel before the powers that be and push off those who are others. Despite the distaste for how people act, Chris seems to be saying there's a place after we die and before we're reborn in which we must come together. Ironically, as a secular Buddhist, I don't believe in rebirth, although I'd like for it to be true. In other words, when all is said and done, we're all one human race. Let's not treat others as lesser or greater. I also can't help but notice in this that I think in the past, early albums, Chris would have probably called some of these people goofs or other names. And here he doesn't really do that. He, has a sympathy. He's hoping that there's a point in time when they can reconnect as human beings. I appreciate that Chris then takes this song that has plumbed the depths of humanity's existence and matters of life and death and pokes fun, though, at how he's too serious by writing lines about being fun at parties and having others draw a dick on his face with a Sharpie if he passes out. As a side note, I have only drawn on someone else with a Sharpie once when passed out, and it was to write 666 on their arm. Chris even brings in a meme for reference with, "Excuse me, sir, this is an Arby's," almost as a way of saying, who really wants to hear any of my ramblings anyway? I do, Chris. I do.
I am at peace. Though presently convulsed with grief, I am at peace.
With these two simple sentences, we're shown that at the end of all this shit, Chris finds himself at peace with life, and perhaps the anger has peeled back and it's more an acceptance of grief of the state of the world. I often feel that too. I look at people like Donald Trump and other world leaders and just think, I feel bad for them because they seem like the most miserable people in the world. That's not to say I think people in power deserve a pass for their actions, but I grieve that we live in a world where people are subjected to so much abuse and stressors that we end up with individuals like Donald Trump and all the other narcissistic personalities out there who seem to think it's okay to make the lives of others worse. So like Chris, my rage has lessened and my grief has risen, but I still hold peace in my mind and heart despite it all.
Some days I'm scared I'm gonna die, or even worse, I might survive. I try to keep these words in mind. Nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Gotta kick at the darkness till it bleeds dirty.
These lines are a reminder that amid the chaos of life, the only thing Chris and myself can fall back on is that life is tough. It's a fight and a struggle. For someone like Chris who has a wife and kids, it's got to be especially scary to think about dying. I, for one, being a single guy with no kids, I generally feel okay with the dark nothingness of death whenever it happens to strike. But living may seem even worse to some folks given how the world is today. The final lyrics of At Peace are from the 1984 song Lovers in a Dangerous Time by Bruce Cockburn from his Stealing Fire album. I remember Cockburn from my childhood in the 1980s and listened to him some more after finding out who Chris was quoting in this song. Cockburn's track If a Tree Falls is the song I remember from his catalog, but others like If I Had a Rocket Launcher sound familiar. Given his stark left-leaning politics, I don't know when a younger me would have heard the Canadian singer, but I'm also not surprised that Chris quotes him. Listening to more of Cockburn's material, I can tell the music influenced Chris's solo work and the song Stargazing on At Peace. In these lines, Chris shares what helps him through the darkness, remembering the Cockburn lyric, life is a fight, but that's how we see events improve. We work at overcoming darkness, and that's how we see daylight. I'm reminded of another great Canadian artist, Leonard Cohen, and his line, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Chris has spoken before in his Patreon podcast about how the world is really at a palliative care stage. There's little to be done to improve things. Chances are we're slowly dying as a planet and as a human species. But what we can do is win those little battles and do our best to kick at the darkness and help a little light get in. Early in my social work graduate program, I was in a class where we discussed making systematic societal changes, and a peer asked the professor how she didn't get overwhelmed and depressed at how slow change occurs in our society. The classmate was frustrated, and she desired to make a difference and alleviate suffering. My professor said that she focused on the individual and worked with one person at a time. I'd often thought about that too. It was nice to hear a social worker in the public health field talk about the individual amid the bigger changes we all wish to see. Not too long ago, I listened to an interview with Christiana Figueres on The Way Out is In, a podcast produced by the followers of the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Figueres was one of the diplomats who established the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. She said that when she looks at systematic changes, making a difference in the world can look distinctive for all of us. Activism doesn't mean marching in the streets per se, or calling up an elected representative. It can be anything that helps improve the lives of others. But perhaps more importantly, working on ourselves is among the most powerful activism we can perform. Both of these experiences reinforce a belief that I've long had. Kicking at the darkness and letting in the light is a constant process, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. We show up to do it every day by being quality human beings. It's about speaking out against injustice, but knowing we're all part of one big human race. It's a difficult line to walk, but one that my social, political, spiritual beliefs and bands like Propagandhi encourage me to do every day.